Hello everyone. On this video we will be looking at solving percent problems using both proportions and the percent equation. Okay, so starting off we're going to look at percent problems just using the proportion. Okay, so most percent problems, if not all, but most percent problems involve the three quantities. You have your base, which is the total amount or your starting value or your whole amount. You have your portion, which is a part of the base, so the part being compared to the base. And you have your percentage rate. Okay. Now, as long as you have those three things, you can solve a percent problem using the following proportion formula. Portion divided by the base is equal to your percentage rate over 100. Or you can just remember it as P over B equals R over 100. All right. So if you are still writing that, feel free to press pause. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to our first example. And remember, we're going to use this formula, so be sure you have that handy. Okay, so what number is 15% of 63? All right, so let's go ahead and solve that using proportions. Okay, so the easiest thing to identify is the rate. The percentage rate, always have the percent right next to it. So your percentage rate, your R, is going to equal 15. Okay, your percentage rate. Okay, now your base, let me write in the actual word base here. So your base, which is B, is 63 because that's the total amount. We're looking for 15% of that total amount. So your B is going to equal 63 because that's your total amount. And clean up that 3 a little bit. There we go. Now your portion, your P, is unknown. That's what we're solving for. Okay, so we have our formula, which is our portion over the base is equal to our rate over 100. So we just plug them in. Okay, so the portion is unknown, so we keep that as just P over the base is equal to your percentage rate over 100. And now we just cross multiply this to solve for our unknown portion. So we cross multiply. So we have 100 times P equals 15 times 63. Okay, so 15 times 63 is 945. So we have 100P equals 945. Okay, so we go ahead and we divide both sides by 100 to isolate our unknown variable. So we divide this side by 100 and this side by 100. So we know that our P is equal to 9.45. Okay. So what does this tell us? This tells us that 9.45 is 15% of 63. All right, so if you are still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and jump to our next example. All right. Oh, not the wrong thing. Meant to write class here. All right, so what percent of 80 is 20? All right, so what I want you to do is press pause and try to solve this one on your own. Remember, you want to identify your portion, your base, and your percentage rate and see which one is unknown. All right, so assuming you've already pressed pause and worked this one out, let's go ahead and verify your answer. Okay. Now we see here when they say what percent, we know that they're asking us to solve for the percent. So our percentage rate, which is R, is unknown. All right. Now our portion, which is part of the total. Okay. Now we see here our total is 80. We're looking for a percentage of that total. So our portion is equal to 20. And our base is the total amount is 80. Okay, so we know this is our portion of the base, and this is our base, or total amount. All right, so now we just go ahead and plug it in. Okay, so portion over base is equal to the rate over 100. That means 20 over 80 is equal to the unknown rate over 100. All right, so now we go ahead and we cross multiply. You have 80 times your rate is equal to 100 times 20. Okay, so 100 times 20 is 2,000. So you have 80 times your rate equals 2,000. Divide both sides by 80 to isolate our variable. Anything divided by itself is 1. So you have your rate is equal to 2,000 divided by 80, which is 25. Okay, so your rate is 25%. Okay, so remember, when solving for the rate using the proportion formula, and this is our proportion formula right here. Put your percent symbol next to your answer. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so what does this tell us? We know that 25%, move that up, of 80 is 20. That's pretty much what it tells us. All right. So if you are still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our next example. Excuse me. Okay. So now they're asking 16 is 20% of what number? Okay, and once again, I want you to press pause and try this one on your own. All right, so assuming you've already done it, press pause and solved it. Let's go ahead and verify your answer. Okay, so if you think about it, 16 is 20% of what number? Okay, now in this case, the what number, that's your base, because we're looking for a portion of a certain number. So your base is unknown. All right. So now, of course, your percentage rate, that's always the easiest to identify. Okay, and your portion, because we're looking for, 16 is a percentage of some bigger number or whatever number it is. Sometimes this number could be smaller, but we're looking at 16 is a percentage of a certain number. Okay, so we know now that our portion, P, is equal to 16. Okay, so we know this is our portion, or part of our base. Our rate and our base is our unknown. Okay, so now we go ahead and plug them in. Portion over base is equal to our rate over 100. All right, so if we plug those in, we have 16 over our unknown base is equal to 20 over 100. And we go ahead and we cross multiply. So 20 times the base, or 20 times b, so we have 20b is equal to 100 times 16. Okay, so 100 times 16 is 1600. So we have 20 times the base equals 1,600. Okay, so we go ahead and divide both sides by 20 to isolate our variable b. Anything divided by itself is 1, so the two 20s cancel out. So your base will equal 1,600 divided by 20, which is 80. All right, so what does this tell us? Well, so we know that 16 is 20% of 80. Okay, because all we did, I'm just going to go for a minute, is replace the what number with the base that we saw. All right, so whenever you want to check your answer, all you have to do is say, okay, I think this, let's say you made a mistake and you made this your portion. If you replace your portion with that, see if it makes sense. Okay, so if you did that by mistake and this doesn't make sense when you plug in your missing variable, see, we replaced what number with 80, this makes perfect sense. So we could say 16 is 20% of 80, that makes sense. But if we plug this in and say 16 is 20% of 12, that wouldn't make sense. Let's say if you plugged in the wrong number, put it in the wrong order. So this way you say, okay, I did something wrong. So you can always go back and double check it and find out where you made your error. So always plug it back into your original just to see if it makes sense. All right. Okay, so if you are still writing, feel free to press pause. But now we're going to look at a different method for solving. We're going to look at percent problems using equations. Okay, now the one thing about this method is you do have to convert your percentage rate into an actual decimal. So remember, with the percentage rate, to convert percent to decimal, you move the decimal point 2 places. So 15 will become 0.15 as a decimal. All right, so let's look at an example of how to solve this using equations and not using the proportion formula. Okay, so what number is 15% of 75? Okay, so to solve this, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. So what number is 15% of 75. Okay. Now, the two things you want to remember is the fact that in mathematics, when you see a story problem and you see is, you can look at that as being equal. When you look at of, you can look at that as being multiplication. So if you say 2/3 of 5, that will be 2/3 times 5. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down that sentence or that question. Okay. So what number, which means we're solving for something. We're solving for an unknown number. So we can put that as n or x or whatever variable you want. Okay, so what number is n? Is, remember, is equivalent to saying equal to 15%. Remember, when using this method, you have to convert the percent to a decimal. So 15% is 0.15 of, remember, that's multiplication. So we're going to put a little multiplication sign. And 75 is just 75. That doesn't change to anything. So this gives us n equals 0.15 times 75. Okay. Now, if you multiply these two together, we know that n is equal to 11.25. Oh, sorry about that. All right. So now, of course, we plug this into our original to see if it makes sense. So this is saying 11.25 is 15% of 75. Okay. And this makes sense. Because you can see, okay, 11.25 being 50% of a larger number, that makes sense. All right. So if you are still writing, of course, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our next example. Okay. So what percent of 16 is 9? Okay. Now, when you're solving for percent using the equation method, you actually do have to convert your final answer because this will give you your final answer as a decimal when you're using the equation method. Now, when you're using the proportion method, you don't have to convert. But when you're using this method, it's very important to remember to convert your final answer. All right, so what I want you to do is go ahead and press pause and try to solve this one. All right, so I'm assuming you've pressed pause and solved this one already. So I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite our problem. What percent of 16 is 9? Okay, so what percent, of course, that's what we're solving for. So we're going to go ahead and give that a variable. We can make it x, we can make it n, we can make it whatever you like. I'll just put n. Remember, of, that's multiplication. So that becomes times. And 16 is just 16. Is, remember, is equivalent to saying equal to. And 9 is just 9. Okay, so that gives us the equation n times 16, or you can put 16n if you want to, is equal to 9. Okay, so just to see how I got that, n times 16 is equal to 16 times n. All right, so now we divide both sides by 16. Anything divided by itself is just 1. So n is equal to 9 divided by 16. You plug that into your calculator, 0.5625. All right. So now if you turn this in as your answer to a percentage problem using the equation method, this would be incorrect because this is the decimal form of it. Okay. When using this method, you have to convert it. Okay. So don't forget to convert your decimal to a fraction. All right, so to convert your decimal to a fraction, you're just going to move the decimal point 2 places. So 1, 2. So n will equal 56.25, and don't forget your percent. All right, so in other words, what does this say? Well, we're going to plug this into our original. 56.25 of 16 is 9. Okay, well, that makes sense because if you think about it, oh, forgot my percent sign. 50% of 16 is 8. So 56.25% of 16 being 9 makes sense. Okay, so remember, always plug it in just to see, okay, well, you know what? My answer makes sense. Because if you did it incorrectly, and remember, if you didn't convert it, and let's say you just stopped right here and put a percent sign. If you put 0.5625% of 16 is 9, that's like saying 0.5% of 16 is 9, and that wouldn't make sense. All right, so remember, always, always, always double check. Okay, you hate to do all of this work and then that one last little step makes your answer wrong. All right, so if you are still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to do one more example. Okay, so 90 is 80% of what number? All right, so you already know. I want you to press pause and try to solve this one on your own. All right, so assuming you've already done it, let's go ahead and verify your answer. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite it. 90 is 80% of what number? Okay, so here, 90 just stays as 90. Nothing really changes there. Remember, your is equivalent to equal to 80%. Remember, your percent turns to a decimal, so 80% is 0.80. Of means multiplication. And what number is your unknown? We'll make that n. Okay, so 90 equals 80% of n. So we're going to go ahead and write that equation. 90 equals 0.80 times n. All right, so we go ahead and we solve for our n. So we divide both sides by 0.80 or 0.8. You don't have to put the 0 there. Anything divided by itself is just 1. So that means that n is equal to 90 divided by 0.8, which is 112.5. All right, so let's plug it in and see if it makes sense. So 90 is 80% of 112.5. Okay, and that makes sense. All right, so if you're still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to have a couple more examples. I just want to make sure you got it. Okay, so we're going to use this in an actual story problem. Okay, so how much acetic acid is in a 5-liter container of acetic acid and water that is marked 80% acetic acid? Okay, so when you solve that, we then want to know how much of that is just water. All right, so I want you to go ahead and press pause and try to solve this one on your own. All right, so I'm assuming you have pressed pause, so let's go ahead and verify your answer. Okay, so to solve this one, first we're going to find out how much is actually acid in a 5-liter container that says it's 80% acid. Okay, so we know that our percentage rate is 80%. Okay, that's a gimme. Okay, so your rate R is equal to 80. And we're going to use the proportion method for this one. At least I am. So you can use whichever method you like. Okay, so I'm going to use the proportion method. Okay, your total amount for your base is equal to 5 because you have 5 liters. Okay, that's the total amount you have. Okay, now your portion that is unknown because even though you have 5 liters, we don't know how many liters of that is actually acid. That's what we're solving for. Okay, your portion is P. Okay, so your portion over base is equal to your rate over 100. Okay, so if we go ahead and plug that in, your portion is unknown, so that stays P over your base is equal to your rate over 100. Okay, so now we go ahead and we cross multiply. Okay, so 100 times P is equal to 5 times 80. Yep. Okay, so 5 times 80, that's 400. So we have 100P equals 400. So we divide both sides by 100 to solve for our variable. Anything divided by itself is 1. So we know that P is equal to 400 divided by 100, which is 4. Okay. So 4 liters is the amount of acid in a 5-liter container. Okay. Now, they also want to know how much is water. Okay, so the amount of water is pretty painless to figure out. Okay, so the amount of water is the total amount, which is 5 liters. So out of 5 liters, if we know that 4 liters of that is acid, then whatever's left has to be water. 5 minus 4 is 1 liter of water. Uh-oh. All right, so if you are still writing this, feel free to press pause. But we're going to go ahead and do one more example. Okay. So let's say a car manufacturer estimates that 25% of the new cars sold out of a certain plant have defective engine mounts. Okay. Now, if 2,136 new cars are sold, how many will have defective engine mounts? All right, so once again, I want you to press pause and try to solve this one. All right, so with this one, well, since I used the proportion method on the previous one, I'm going to use the equation method on this one. Okay, so all this is asking, basically, this question is asking what number is 25% of 2,136. Okay, so if you really read it, like I say, you have 25% of the cars sold have defective engine mounts. If they sold 2,136, 25% of those cars have defective engine mounts. This is really all they're asking. So what number that you're in is equal to your 25%. Remember, when using this method, the equation method, you have to convert it to a decimal of 2,136. Remember, of is just multiplication. So you can use the X, or if you wanted to avoid confusion, you can use the dot. All right, so this is basically saying, let me move this up some, N is equal to 0.25 times 2,136. Okay, so if you multiply those, you have N is equal to 534. New cars with defective mounts. All right. Now, as you see here, that's why I showed you both methods to solve, because although I prefer this method, it's just easier to me. It is very, very helpful and very important to learn how to do both methods. Okay, and as you'll see in future videos, you'll see that for some of these problems, the proportion method is the ideal method. Okay, so some problems, oh, this is perfect, it solved it really fast and you're done. But on other problems, learning the proportion method is just as important. Okay, so it's okay to have a preference, but you still want to know how to do both. All right, so hopefully this made sense, and I will see you on the next video.